I'll hand you over to Manoj.
Is the mic set up? Hello, good afternoon. I hope you can hear me well. Okay, perfect. If I walk through this way, still audible? Kind of, okay. I would like to walk. It was a very good meal. Thanks, Cameron. So good to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity. As Cam kindly introduced me, my name is Manoj, and I work at Lambda Test, leading their developer relations, as well as looking after the open source office. More open source for me, which is great. And I've been in Selenium community for past over 10 years now, and I've been contributing since 2009. I've seen Selenium 1, and as Cameron mentioned, we are at Selenium 4.5 now, and we're going to release it 4.6, and so on. So I'm here today to talk about what's new in Selenium 4. Let's get started. All right, so the next 45 minutes, I'm going to walk you through the Selenium current state, and then let's talk about what is new in Selenium 4, and then we can also look into, check. It works? No, not yet. Check. Perfect, thank you. All right, so we're going to look into Selenium current state and then Selenium 4, and then want to take a quick sneak peek of what is the WebDriver BiDi. I don't know how many of you have heard about it. A quick show of hands. Anyone know about WebDriver BiDi? Perfect. And then we're going to look at what is the future, like how does the future of Selenium 4 looks like, or even beyond that. All right, let's get started. The Selenium, the current state. So first of all, the bus factor. How many of you know about bus factor? Okay, which means you're in the open source world, or at least you've been managing teams. All right, so bus factor is nothing but the fear of missing out the important information and capabilities being missed out, not being shared to your team members. We have been very very much looking forward to not having that sort of a bus factor. I think it is derived from the phrase called getting hit by a bus, right? And unfortunately, we don't have to do that in the Selenium team. We don't want to hurt anyone or get accident by it. But the fact is, we have been making sure everyone in the Selenium team knows how to deploy, how to maintain different client bindings. Like I'm sure most of you know in Selenium we have Java, C#, Python, JavaScript, and different languages. Right now at least 3 people know how to release each of the component. I mean, the bus factor is the other side. I think it's more than that. We wanted to give the freedom. It's such a selfless activity of open source, isn't it? So we wanted to give the flexibility, like, you can go take off, enjoy time off with the family, and not being guilty about, one person being away doesn't, let the project be hanging in. If one person has been handling Java, if that person is away, it doesn't mean that Java is not being released for a couple of months. We have gone past that days, and right now, at least, as I said, 3 people know how to test, how to release and test, each of the components. And we have been very, looking forward to look after the documentation. The website that we have is completely refreshed. It's all in React. Hugo, a lot of that has been there. How many of you looked into the new website of Selenium 4? A couple of you. Yeah. So we have been documenting all of it and automating the release process. Thanks to Titus from Sauce Lab. He's been fantastic and instrumental in bringing that, the whole process in documenting each of this. Selenium is a huge monorepo, right? Because you can imagine Selenium is being a big repository itself, and there's a lot of languages. All the languages in one repository. It's a monorepo setup. We use Bazel for CI. A lot of those things are happening, and it's very tough if it's not being documented. And I know we have been lacking. A lot of people have been asking on how to contribute to Selenium in different languages. It's better than ever. So if you're still looking into contributing to Selenium, the time is still there because there's lots and lots of new things are coming up. And we also do releases every 4 to 6 weeks. I think back then there was just a joke called Selenium 3 will be released by next Christmas, which was told by Simon, but unfortunately he didn't say which Christmas it was, and we took up 3 years, and finally it was released during Christmas, but that was a bad joke. And Selenium 4, we said Chinese New Year, but again we didn't say which Chinese New Year, and we took up another 3 years more, and we finally released Selenium 4, and that's how Selenium team has been working on. And that's not good for the health of any project, isn't it? And it's open source. And we wanted to change that. And we brought in a lot of processes. So now we release every 4 to 6 weeks. And we wanted to give a lot of feedback from users. Now we are getting a lot of feedbacks, and we are including features from different users that have been requesting. And it's better than ever. That's what I wanted to leave the message here. And there's a reason why we kept 4 to 6 weeks. Ideally, we wanted to have it 2 to 3 weeks or a week to 2. But it's too much change for the users, as well as we wanted to keep it 4 to 6 because it's in line with whatever the Chrome team has been doing, because now that we have a new capability called Chrome DevTools protocol that we've integrated with, and hence we have it as a 4 to 6 week process. So we release every new Selenium in 4 to 6 weeks, and Selenium 5 is going to come, and I'll cover that in the very last slide that we have, and you have a quick sneak peek of what it's all about. All right, with that, these are quick facts on we wanted to showcase. There's been a lot of talks going on, people moving away from Selenium and checking other projects. Nothing bad about other projects; it's great in its own way. But I wanted to leave you with some facts and figures on the unique visitors that we have in the new website and the documentation that we have. Around 3.6 million unique visitors every month. This is like a monthly statistics, and we have all the. And this wasn't before, right? So before Selenium 4, we had a very old project. It's a JSP-based Java web servlet and all of that. I think we've been having that for over past 10 years, and we didn't improve it. And that didn't have any of these. And now we have a better analytics, which will help us know, what sort of users coming in, from where they are coming in. So yeah, unfortunately, sorry. Australia is not there in the list, but they are down there. I forgot to click on the details button, but you guys are there. So. And then there is top pages, which shows, what are the pages like. Of course, downloads is one of the main thing. But we didn't just do for the sake of, we want to look at some numbers. But the thing that we wanted to understand is what exactly you're using. Like for us, since we advocate Docker, Linux containers, and all of it, we often forget about the users coming from Windows. Right? So this is one of the things that we found out. Like there are many shocking things that we found out based on these analytics. One being where a lot of users are coming in from. Even though we advocate for using Linux containers as much as possible in remote execution, but we still have in Selenium a lot of users based on Windows. So probably we should test more. Like probably we run our Selenium-based tests before every release on Linux containers, but we realize we need to run it on Windows. That doesn't mean that it's not being tested on Windows. Of course, you would have raised all the bugs if that has been the case. So that's Windows in the first place. At least 2.6 million visitors are using Windows-based machines to look up all these messages. So probably we're gonna work on that, and that's what we are doing over the period of time. And then we also have something called search that we added into the website, which is very important. Like kind of figure out what users are searching for, which pages are being interacted a lot, because this is giving us more information on which features our users are looking at, so that we could build up more on top of it, or add more documentation, add more code samples, so that will be helpful. And we also have Selenium usage. Again, coming back to the point, like you would imagine, even we as a Selenium team couldn't imagine, or I don't know if it's the fact that being Selenium 4 has been released. In last 1 month alone, we have seen Selenium Java has been bumped up by 25 million to 45 million downloads in a month. Like imagine 25 million to 45. That's the the scale that we're talking about. And not just Java, like including Selenium C# is there, and then Python is there. I mean, that's the that's the 10-year timeline that you see from July 2021 until June 2022. You can see the number. It has been always consistent around 25 million, but I think last month alone when we checked, it was around 45 million. It shows the number of users that people love Selenium 4 and all of it. And I'm so glad to be here talking more on in the next couple of slides. And purposefully, I didn't add JavaScript because you might not get the exact number of stats for JavaScript, just because of the reason that a lot of projects depend, right on top of JavaScript. Like say, for example, Protractor, and a couple of other projects which are built on top of Node.js, the Selenium node. So apparently, whenever people install Protractor, so the node Selenium number also will go up. So we don't want to represent a misnumber on it. So I just ignore that. But I think that gives you a whole number on the Selenium usage. And David from Browser Stack again has been doing a fantastic job in bringing it up in getting up these stats for us. And we're growing 25% quarter over quarter. All right, let's get into the groove on Selenium 4 stuff, like what we wanted to do. So what's really new? Well, first things first, we removed a lot of code because we feel very satisfied. Like, how many of you end up looking at your old code, you're feeling, oh, is this what I've written? Should I delete it? Quick show of hands. Oh, great, great, great. So we have done that a lot. So Selenium code base is a lot leaner, as it was like not unlike before. And it also considerably cut down the image of the jar file that you'll download, like probably 10, 12 MB for sure. And we also improved relative locators, which is something new that we have. And I'll talk a bit about it. And the most important piece and most interesting part for me in Selenium 4 is about Selenium Grid, the observability. I'm sure most of you heard about observability if you are getting into a microservices way of development and cloud computing. Observability is the need of the hour, and people are looking towards to get into observability. So is there anything as a QAs, as a testers, as an automation engineer, whatever role you want to pick in, I don't want to get into that debate, but whatever designation you're part of and you're doing automation tests using Selenium, if your question is how we can get into observability, yes, we can get into, and that's a good news. And I'll actually show you a demo on how to look for tracing capability within Selenium Grid, which is exciting. And then also we'll talk about DevTools protocol, and then some of other features within it. So first things first, as we said, we removed a lot of code. So one of the things that we did is deprecating decide capabilities. Decide capabilities was playing a very important role in figuring out which test to run at which machines. So if you're having a Selenium-based test and using Selenium Grid to remote execute it, decide capabilities was playing an important role in figuring out which test to run at, basically which version and all of it. You might be having it, remote, VMs, or using cloud providers like, Lambda Test, Sauce Labs, and Process Stack, any of it. Decide capability was playing a key role, and we have deprecated that with a favor of the client binding and the browser binding itself, which is nothing but the Firefox options, Chrome options. So if you're using Selenium now and using Selenium 3, and you must be using decide capabilities if you're executing it in remote browser, then in Selenium 4, this is one of the key things that you wanted to change. And that's it, right? Because Selenium 4 is essentially a drop-in replacement. We have done so many changes, but from a user perspective, if you ask me what's in it, like how much time would it take me to upgrade it from Selenium 4? Well, it's just a matter of upgrading the dependencies. That's it. I hope so. And well, I said this in one of the conferences, and people said, oh, no, I had a lot of errors in different code base, like code it. Oh, yeah, because they were using a lot of JavaScript executors. So if you're using a lot of JavaScript executors, then sometimes you might end up with some of this. But essentially, from a Selenium team perspective, we wanted users to have a very seamless experience in upgrading Selenium 3 to Selenium 4. And yeah, that was a bad joke, but still, the only expectation from you is to update the dependency file, and I think you should be good to go. And I think decide capabilities is one of the things, and there's also a find by interface that we added, which is something that if you have been using that, it's something that to change. So we have a neat page in Selenium documentation, which I'll happy to share. If you drop by, I'll be at Lambda Test booth, and you could, we could chat more about it. So. Those are the two things essentially, and then you're good to go in Selenium 4. And relative locators. So this is actually, it's not a new thing. Like we have thought about it. Like we don't want to boast self about it. Like, this is something that we started with a project. It's called Sahi. I don't know how many of you know Sahi. Oh, that's great. So many of you know. My Indian friends out there. Cool. Because he started from India, so he's an ex-thought worker. Essentially, he was part of Jason's team back then in 2004, and he was part of Selenium, and he came out and he started Sahi, and that's how the project evolved. And so they had this neat way of locating elements in a more friendly manner. Like say, hey, you have a form, and then you have a first name, last name. So imagine if you don't have a proper locator for it, and essentially the good practice is to go and talk to your devs and make sure you have a proper IDs, CSS, or whatever element location strategy that you want to be part of. For some reasons, it is not. And you want to have a backup locator strategy in case if something goes wrong, you want to pick up the second one. So how do you do that? So that's we found out, the friendly locators is part of it. So essentially, friendly locators was the name that we had before, and now we call it relative locators. It's mean that, hey, Selenium WebDriver, please locate this element above this one, near this one, to the left of, to the right of, and then near this one. So the way how it works is you instruct Selenium WebDriver to say, essentially you find an element which could be in any part of the page you have, and you wanted to say first name, right? So you have if you found out the element locator for first name, which is essentially a label, and then say, hey, to the right of, and then essentially it is an input box. So you can give a send keys command, and then you can fill in your first name. So that's how essentially it works, and it's very neat. I mean, if you ask me what is the real purpose of it, well, it's nice. Some people have requested in the past, and we thought this is something that we could include. And more than that, Tycho is another automation tool which was there, and ThoughtWorks developed it, and they also had this. And we saw people liked it, and we thought we should also be using it. So yeah, relative locators and friendly locators, however we could call it, is one of the things that we have added in Selenium 4 that you could go ahead and try it out. And window and tab management, well. This is something that has been a pain for a lot of, many years. You open up your main window, your application to test, and then you probably have a link to click on it, and then it opens up another tab. So how do you test really a multi-window or multi-tab, scenarios? That was very, it's very hard before in Selenium versions, especially in 2, and then Selenium 3, there's some improvements to it, but not essentially, right? So in Selenium 4, it's a lot better. In Selenium 4, you could use, we have native APIs, like just simple enough to give driver.switch to and then new window. Essentially, within that, you will give, you find a hash of that window ID or a name of it, and then you'll give. And it's a lot better now. You just have a new interface type, which you just give Windows type, and then you can either option of to choose a window or a tab. Right? It's a lot easier. That's why we call it better window and tab management. Again, this is one of the new features that we wanted to do, because as we see and we hear most from the users, having a multi-window is something that we wanted to cater to. And so second thing, as I was showing you in what's new in Selenium 4, is the grid, which is my most important or the favorite part of it. So how many of you used Selenium Grid before? Okay, I'll ask you one more time. How many of you used Selenium Grid before? Okay, cool. I want to ask 2 more times so that it becomes 4, because we have been, yeah. Cool, so how many of you use Selenium 2, like the Selenium Grid 2? There you go. Okay, not many of you. So for those of you who have been using Selenium Grid 2 and then 3, and then possibly now 4, I missed out asking how many of you use Selenium Grid 4. Let's ask that, just for the completion's sake. Yeah? So how many of you have explored Selenium Grid 4? Okay, a couple of you. That's great. That's great. So if you've seen the evolution of how Selenium Grid has improved over the period of time, as being part of the team, I feel amazing, right? So the way how Selenium 2 Grid used to work is just a hub and node model, right? It's very simple. But in Selenium Grid 4, the debugging is very easy. And we also, most importantly, have the open telemetry APIs, as I mentioned, where you will be able to do end-to-end tracing, since essentially Grid is nothing but a client and server architecture. So just to have a nostalgic moment, at least, this is how the architecture of Selenium Grid 3 was all about. You write a test, and then you try to execute on a browser, which is remote, and then you have Selenium Server, which is essentially your remote WebDriver. And then you have, pointed to a grid. And then there is also a man in the middle, which is called the browser and the driver, which is essentially your Chrome driver or a Gecko driver, or whatever have for different browsers. Like for Safari, it's based on extensions. So that's how it should work. So you can see there is multiple hops in between, isn't it? So you have your test, and then you do all these hops and reach to the browser. So that's how typically Selenium Grid 3 architecture has been. And yeah, for a few people, it was very hard to debug what, something, okay, let me ask you this instead of going in. So my line of thought was different. Let me change it for a change. And let me ask you this. How many of you have seen an error when you try to run your tests in a remote browser, saying, and you have seen an error like remote browser exception, browser may have died or crashed? So I can see smiles. Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, like error message. It says, it's not cool, right? I mean, that's not a friendly way of saying what has gone wrong. You never know. I mean, that's where things from Selenium test runs fast and good in my local, but when I run it in remote, it doesn't work. I mean, it's not Selenium fault. It's how your infrastructure has to be built on. Like, is it good enough? And partially I agree that from a Selenium team, we didn't give enough information on how and what needs to be shown to the user, instead of just showing a not so useful message of saying, hey, your browser has crashed, and laughing at it. So possibly your network admin or someone will go, yes, such, and do all that such things, and you get up and running the browser. So we have changed so many things. With the advent of microservices, cloud computing and all that stuff, we wanted to give Selenium Grid 4 a complete changeover. So the entire code base has been rewritten. It's been based out of microservices. You can see all the components. So you could wonder, well, Manoj, you showed me Selenium Grid 3, and it seems like it had 3 hops or 4 hops. Now it seems like you have 8 hops. Well, that's not essentially how it should be perceived. So move away from that line of thought and let me explain to you. Even though it's all small components, each of these components has a very separate process for itself. Like, it has its own job to do, and it does it very well. We have tested it extensively, so we run millions of tests every month. So this part remains the same, you being the client, or your laptop being the client, your test being the client, and then essentially the goal is to run your test in a remote browser. So what happens under the hood is really matter. So all this, let me try to explain. It's a very hard thing, so I usually run a full-day workshop on Selenium Grid, and I know I have like next 45 minutes or something, but I'll try to explain the best, and hopefully you get out of it. So first thing first, it starts with router, and then goes to the session queue. Essentially, if you know Selenium, it's a session-based, right? It runs over a HTTP protocol. So the first thing that it does is to give you a new session ID, and then it'll then go into where does it go? Cool. So it's go to the session map. So that's how even I get confused at sometimes. So and then even bus is really one of the key things that we added, and then distributor is more like a kind of a ticket checker to make sure, hey, you're doing right, hey, I'm doing right. That's typically essentially what distributor does. And then you have number of nodes, which is nothing but whether it could be your Linux containers or browsers or VMs. It's a mix and match, or whatever your setup is, being hybrid or being Linux containers only. And then you have a number of browsers onto it. So that's how essentially it works. And in one of the key differences, or if you want to understand, okay, Manoj, this is confusing. Thank you so much for trying to explain. So one thing that I want you to understand is, in Selenium Grid 3, everything was HTTP, even the multiple calls, and it was expensive, and it's taking a lot of time, network latency, all of that happened. But in Grid 4, the event bus that you see here down is based off message bus. So it's nothing but an event bus, right? So all the communication between Selenium Grid 4, all the components are through a socket-based connection. It's like messages. If you know event-driven architecture, and if you heard about message bus, that essentially nothing but the event bus does. So it's much faster. Even though there are multiple components, it might look like there is multiple hops, but it's not essentially the case. Selenium Grid 4 is faster than ever, and it'll communicate between all of this. So I have one more slide. So how many of you understood the flow? I know it's a tricky question because I don't want to get embarrassed by having no hands show up. Okay, great. Okay, one hand is saving me. Okay, a couple of more hands. Thank you, folks. You can visit by our booth, and I'm happy to share something for you. All right, I have this slide, which will try to explain. So the moment you trigger your tests, essentially remote WebDriver, let's start by that. So you have a remote WebDriver, and so the first command would be driver.get, right? With me? Yeah, so let's make it interactive. So the first command, driver.get. What it does, it'll open up a browser with your application under test. So that's when router gets hit first. Router is nothing but a client-facing interface, which is the first component that will get invocated. And then it will check whether, is it really a new session or not? As I said, and most of you, smiled and nodded your head nicely, saying, yeah, it is session-based, which I was so grateful. So it'll actually check whether it's a new session or not. If no, it'll actually check session map. If you remember the previous slide, session map is nothing but, consider that as a database of session IDs, basically, nothing but, right? So it will check session map and say whether, hey, no, it's not a new session. Then probably it's already a running some of the tests, and maybe you want to attach to the session ID and then continue with your execution. So how many of you does that? I've heard a lot of people does that because you start your Selenium script, do 1, 2, 3, 4 steps, and then probably do on some API calls, get a product ID or a subscriber ID, and then you want to continue back with your execution. So when you do such things like a hybrid way of doing things, you might want to attach to an existing session rather than creating a new session so that it speeds up your Selenium execution. So when you're doing that, I think now Selenium Grid 4 will be very faster, where it will check for existing session map. If it's not found, if it's not a new one, it'll go and attach it to the node. Node is essentially nothing but your own laptop or new sessions, all of it. If it's yes, it'll go and say, hey, I'm a new session, please accept me. It's all like the, welcoming a newcomer. So it'll go and hit the new session queue here. And then essentially new session queue is there. So it's nothing but consider new session queue like a foyer. So you go and assemble there, and then you knock the door, and then you get inside. So session queue is nothing but like a house, and probably in essentially, something like a foyer sort of a thing where you get your sessions queued up, and then new session queue is something that gets added. And the new session queue again talks to event bus and make sure the communication happens, which event bus will say, hey, distributor, I'm all good. There is no, attacker. It's nothing but a new session queue request, and I'm all good. And I'm going to create a new session ID. And then it says, hey, distributor, thank you for sharing that information. Since you said it's a good session and I want to accept that, let me put it in the session map so that it gets added to the database of session map. And then what distributor does is, you remember the decide capabilities that I spoke about? Now it's in Chrome options and Firefox options. Now that will happen here in required capabilities. So if you have requested for a particular version of Chrome browser version or Mac OS versions or Windows OS versions, it will check whether those nodes are available. So that's when this required capabilities acts up. So if there is no, it'll say, hey, I don't have this combination. It's simple. If it's yes, then say, hey, great, I have a node, and I'll run your test there. So that's how it works. Great. Now let's do a show of hands. Now how many of you understood Selenium Grid 4? Great. Thank you. So just go back now to a couple of slides, and I'll tell you, yeah. So this is the more fancier version of what I showed in the next one. So you have the router and then session map, which tests all the things on whether figuring out whether the session exists or not, and then event bus is there, and then the nodes. So why do we want to do all of this? Going back to my point around observability. Going back to my point around having a tracing capability. So let me go to the next one. So when it comes to observability momentum, it's all about, it's a way of life, I would say. That's why developers get very excited about, hey, we are into the observability momentum. That's great. Like, what does it essentially mean? So observability is nothing but you being able to answer without knowing the questions beforehand. Confusing again? That's observability. Welcome to observability. Well, so if you're not too sure about how your product performs in production, observability will be very key because those metrics will have those outputs. Back in time when there is no cloud and there is no things, I couldn't imagine the sort of work that I used to do, like being remote SSHing, looking at the logs, looking at various different systems and figuring out, hey, where has it gone wrong? And calling my network, certified people and making sure, they coordinate with me. And basically, it's throwing over the wall will happen. All such bureaucratic things will happen. All of you have gone through it. So, so that's how basically it has been. Now, with observability, it's a lot easier. So every request that happens between to the client to the server, everything is being taken care, and every traces is being required. So it's just like you walk down here and you see your foot marks down, just exactly like that. So every session that starts from your browser and hit the Selenium Grid and goes into your browser, everything is being traced right now. So that if anything goes wrong, unlike the unfriendly message that we smiled about, being remote browser being died, you'll get a lot more information. You can actually look at spans. Spans are nothing but a small piece of information within the telemetry APIs. So that's what you'd say. So each trace consists of a series of spans. Spans is nothing but a small piece of information that tells you, hey, what has happened in that stage. and it's executed within it. So moving on, like, what do you mean by essentially tracing Selenium Grid? Well, there is two parts of it. So one, there is instrumentation, and then after instrumenting, how do you use that? Like, after collecting the data, how do you use that? So the good part is, if someone says we are into observability momentum, there's two things would happen. One, they would have instrumented their microservices code with some sort of open telemetry APIs, right? And in Selenium team, we have already done that for you. So we have simplified it for you. All you have to do is collect the data. And how do you do that? That's exactly what I'm going to show now. It's too much of talking. Let's get into the code. All right. So is this mic working now? Switch off mics. Okay, cool. So we are using Aegir. So Aegir, as you see, like it's J-A-E-G-R, and we spell it as Aegir. So Aegir is nothing but an observability, visualization framework which will help you give a meaningful visualization towards the data metrics that has been collected. So there is two parts to it. Let me figure out. So I've open sourced a project called Tracing Selenium Grid, and it's available here that you could see. So as I said, code instrumentation is one part, and then collecting is one part. And getting started is very easy, as I mentioned. So you all need Aegir client. So if you have your Docker running, you just need Aegir. And then you need to instrument the code, and we have something called the shell file. So start grid distributor.sh. This is what essentially you need. So this is nothing but the things that I mentioned in a flow diagram, right? So in Selenium Grid, how you do is Selenium jar, and then -hub, and then -node. You'll have all the things up and running. So now, if you have this file, it's just that it. You're instrumenting the code already, and you're asking for traces. So two things you have to do. One, start the Aegir, because that's what will give you a neat UI. So it's already up here, and you can essentially select a service and showing what you want to look for the information. Let me see if I have things open. Yeah, there we go. So all the individual components that you see on the flow diagram will have all the things here. Selenium distributor, node, router, session queue, all of these things will be here. So one of the things that you can always go in Selenium node, as you know, that's the place where your test will be running. So you could actually, if any error happens, it'll actually show in red color. Unfortunately, I don't have one that shows error. So you can click on it, it'll show you a nice graph on or what has happened. And also, this is an indirect way of checking performance as well, like how your APIs are interacting with different things on your browser. So it's a nice way to look at things. So whatever you're seeing is actually observability in testing. If you want to get into observability, and if you're curious to learn about how do I get started with observability, and if you're already using Selenium, I think this is the best place to start, because you understand the concept of observability and try to be practical and hands-on. And this is essentially what developers do in microservices as well. They already instrument the code, and they just use this, some sort of Aegir or Zipkin. There are multiple other vendors who test that, and it's open source as well. And all you need is, a UI which will give you, convert those raw metadata into a consumable and a meaningful data, and that's what this all is all about. Right, so that's what I wanted to show here by visualizing traces. So let's move on into WebDriver by IDE, and this mic works now? I'll check. Yeah, so as you see, WebDriver by IDE is nothing, but I just, before I want to start with WebDriver by IDE, I wanted to quickly step back and understand the CDP, which is nothing but the Chrome DevTools protocol. So Chrome DevTools protocol is nothing but it's nothing but a debugger within a Chrome browser, right? And essentially started as that, and it's become a sort of it's actually not a protocol or a standard itself. It's just the name protocol as part of it. It's chatty, which means that how many of you had done right-click, inspect element, and have seen the network console, or even checking for API network? So most of you have done it. Yeah, thanks. So all that is happening in the DevTools, the window, is the things behind the CDP, right? So essentially, all the things that you're able to see and do in the DevTools window is something that you could do in the tools. So by the likes of Playwright, Cypress, Puppeteer. So all these tools are based out of CDP. It is essentially meant to be a developer, a debugger protocol, but since it has a flexibility of doing a lot more things than just, driving a browser, which is what Selenium does, you could get the performance metrics. So can someone say me any things that you do within the DevTools protocol? So what do you look for? You look for console logs, and then API responses, headers, okay, network, okay. Sorry? Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. Right. Okay, there's so many answers. Do you have so many gift cards? Okay. All right, so the point is you can do all of this now within the tools, and that's why people loved Selenium, Cypress, Playwright, and all of this. So the good part is the whole CDP is now baked in Selenium. So now you get, all the things that you're able to do within CDP, you can do within Selenium as well, right? So that's what I meant by native support for Chrome DevTools protocol through DevTools interface. So if you look at Selenium codebase, there is an interface called DevTools, and you have all of these things here. So things like geolocation. So how many of you people used to do geolocation? Like, do you have a location-based content testing at all? If that's the case, yeah, that's the case, then you would have probably fiddled with changing the latitude and longitude and figuring out, hey, it works. And then network interception, a lot of that stuff. So now that we understood about Chrome DevTools protocol, the WebDriver BiDi is nothing but a new standard. It's going to be a new protocol itself. So all the browser vendors, include the likes of Google, Apple, the Selenium team, has been working all together in forming up this BiDi. So WebDriver BiDi is nothing but bidirectional. The short form is BiDi. So WebDriver bidirectional, it's going to solve all the problems. It's going to solve, so the only disadvantage of Puppeteer, say for example, is it's not cross-browser, right? So by using WebDriver BiDi, it'll be cross-browser very soon. So that's the advantage of Chrome, WebDriver BiDi. And there is a good blog that you can go learn about these things. And some of the things that we have added as part of BiDi is nothing but has authentication interface, which means this is one of the things that our users have been asking. So I'm sure most of you have done as well. Like if you have opening up an application to test where you need to enter username and password, right? And then previously what you used to do is add the username and password within a URL, and then you will use it. But now you don't have to do any more. You can do within the BiDi APIs, and we have already have a wrapper on top of it. And we also have something called network interception, which is nothing but which will capture network events. Which will, you have heard about mocking backend. Have you heard about mocking UI frontend? 1, 2. Let me repeat the question. So have you heard about mocking the front-end UI at all? Yeah. So if you heard about it, but if you're not used in practice, well, you can now do that with Selenium 4. I'll show you quickly how it can be done. And then also the geolocation CDP, which I mentioned about, where you can emulate geolocations. How many time have I got? Cool. So first things first, we will look at network interception. So let me show the demo. I'll then ask you a question. So probably this qualifies for the gift card. So demo gods, hopefully you're with me. Okay. All right, take a look. What happens? Did you notice? Okay. Can anyone tell me what happened? Sorry? No, sorry, wrong answer. Okay. Yes. Oh, that's more technical. Yeah, you're right. Thank you. Your name? Basred. Okay. Ah, Cyprus. Okay. He's a CDP guy for you. So yeah, thanks, Basred. So that's what essentially network interception means. So you'll be essentially be able to mock your UI on the fly. So you go with mocking on the backend only when, say, for example, the UI service is not ready, the data is not ready. Now that you have microservices, all the producer and consumers. But for some reasons, for some times in the teams, the UI will be the APIs will be ready, but the UI, the mock images will not be ready. So essentially, you cannot do automation. So in those cases, you can actually mock UI images, anything that you would want, and still make sure your automation runs. So that was one example. So in the example, what we essentially done is, let me run it for you. I'm liking it because demo goers are with me. So this automation bookstore.app is essentially nothing but a demo page for shows about images for different books, and I'm just changing it. So imagine I'm waiting for the image from each of these authors, and each of the authors have not given me images, which means that I can't go live. Essentially, you can go live and you can test it out by using all of this mocking. So how do we essentially do is, let me go into, I hope it's a lot better in the back there. So let's go bottom up. Ignore the thread.sleep. And I made it so because you could see essentially what's happening. It's a good excuse, isn't it? So let's go bottom up, as I said. So we are getting into driver.get, the automation bookstore.dev. And if you really see, what we're doing is we have carefully encapsulated within a try block, and there is a network interceptor. So this network interceptor is nothing but a wrapper that we have wrote within Selenium 4, which is part of the BIDE. We are not using directly the CDP, which is from the WebDriver BIDE. And then it takes two arguments, which is a driver itself, and next is a route. So what is a route, if you ask me? So route is a thing that does the magic for you. So you have a route interface here. And as we had a technical explanation from our friend there, he's smiling. So all the things that you're going to do here is make sure, here what I'm doing is finding all the images in that page, which has a JPG extension. And then on the response, I'm making sure I'm overriding it by a content type, and I'm passing in bytes, which is nothing but the Selenium logo that I wanted to pass by. So that, that's a way of showing you how to replace the existing images on a web to a new new image that you wanted to do. How many of you think that is cool? Okay. So the other thing that I'm going to show is the geolocation. So let's take this website for example. Where we go, this one. So this is just a demo website. It shows browserleaks.com, and it shows where we are. It's very accurate, by the way. It shows exactly where we are in Melbourne Exhibition Center. So it's for the record. It's getting recorded, Cameron. So we know we are all here. So let's mock this. So if I run a test with using any browser with this, it should essentially show we are in Melbourne Exhibition Center. But say you have a content that will change based on where your users are coming from. Let's say, for example, Amazon, right? So Amazon.com in the US page will be very different than Amazon in India, or in Australia for that matter, even the Prime Video and all of it, right? So in such cases, geolocation testing will be very helpful. So let's try to be, so I used to be a Sydney sider once, and I like the Opera House very much. And I've seen it so many times that I wouldn't want to see anymore. But let's pretend we are going to go there. So for which what we all need is a latitude and longitude of Opera House. And we're going to use the same demo website. And it should show we are in Opera House. There we go. And how does the magic happen? It's nothing but, let me go into the presentation mode again. So all you have to do is emulate your ask Selenium WebDriver to a set geolocation override. So that the interface that you see, emulation.set geolocation override, is actually coming in from the Chrome DevTools protocol. So all the things that you're able to do, like so many of you mentioned many examples, so all the things could be you're able to do. So if all you need to figure out is, what do I have to use within devtools.send? So from Selenium, devtools.send is the only DevTools interface. If you remember the previous slides, I told you that's how we integrated DevTools within Selenium codebase. So here, I just need to give a latitude and longitude, and I'm done. So which means I'm able to mock the geolocation. So that's 2 examples that we have seen. In the interest of time, let's jump off. I've shown so many demos on that. I want to spend more time. Happy to spend more time with you all folks. But what's next? Selenium the future. Well, Selenium started way back with the so-called the JSON wire protocol. So how many of you use this JSON wire protocol? Now if we look back, we know how bad it was. But it still served the purpose. It helped us. And then we have gotten W3C, which took ages. So W3C is nothing but a standard. So there is 2 different meanings. So Selenium is different and WebDriver is different. How many of you know that? What is Selenium? Okay, and what is WebDriver?
The protocol that it communicates.
Perfect, the same guy. Thank you, Basrat. I'm liking you. By the way, I didn't say these questions to him beforehand, so thanks, Basrat. So yeah, WebDriver is a protocol. It's a standard. Anyone can implement it. So you know Nightwatch, you know Test Cafe, you know WebDriver IO. So let's take WebDriver IO for example. So WebDriver IO is a JavaScript tool. And thanks to folks from Sauce Labs, they started it. And it's a wonderful tool in JavaScript space. And they've used, essentially, it's an implementation. So Selenium WebDriver, as we call it, is an implementation of a W3C spec or a WebDriver protocol. So Selenium WebDriver is a WebDriver implementation. And WebDriver IO is also an implementation, but in its own way. It has its own architecture and all of things for various many reasons. And now the future is BiDi. We spoke about. So bidirectional. So WebDriver BiDi is going to be the future where you will have the best of both worlds. So if you're someone who moved into different tools for various reasons, saying, hey, I can get performance metrics, I can get all of this, now Selenium is going to have all of it. But it'll take one time. I'm not telling you it is available readily. So if you see the few slides that I had, so I've clearly mentioned in my title, geolocation is a CDP. So which means I'm using directly the raw CDP APIs in my code. Unlike network interception is BiDi, and network interception is BiDi, and the web authentication is also BiDi. So what essentially means is, if you're using BiDi APIs, you're safe. No matter whatever browser you're using, whatever versions of browser you're using, you're safe. But unlike in the CDP, how it works is it's very tightly interdependent on the Chrome version and the DevTools version. If you're using Chrome browser, say 105, and the time when you wrote the code, probably 96 was there, it will fail. Because at that point in time, whatever the protocol was available was only 96. So if you're using CDP APIs within Selenium, that's the only limitation that you have to be aware of. But if you're using the BiDi APIs, you're better off, and you're ready for the future already. So that's going to be the future. A lot of companies are working towards it, and I can't wait for it. It's exciting. But as I said, it's a standard itself. The W3C browser testing tools group. I hope I said it right. So the whole group is working towards it, and that's going to be the future. And more than that, we wanted to move into the batteries included concept. It's something that more users have been waiting for. So how many of you felt the pain of downloading the correct Chrome driver, putting in the system path, downloading the current Gecko driver? Yes. Thank you. So all your, so I couldn't control the laugh. So all that's going to be taken care. So we are introducing Selenium Manager. How many of you have used Boni Garcia's WebDriver Manager? Couple of you. So that's going to be baked in within Selenium project. So he's been donating that project to Selenium, and we are calling it Selenium Manager. It's going to automatically download browser drivers for you within the Selenium project, so that you don't have to do any of that by yourself. It'll be taken care. On the fly, it'll automatically detect what browser version you are using in your laptop or whatever machine it is. It'll automatically download on the fly, and essentially, I was trying to have a demo, but couldn't make it working. But happy to chat about it and at least show you how it works. And interestingly, it is made out of Rust. I don't know what Boni felt, but but he felt like probably Rust language is missing, and he added that. And then in .NET, you're going to have async await APIs, and then in Python again, and Selenium Grid, UI. If you've seen the Selenium Grid UI, we're going to add analytics to it, but don't ask me when. Probably I will say probably next Diwali, since Diwali is coming. And I'm not committing which Diwali it is. So yeah. Cool. So as I say, Selenium is an open source project. So all the improvements we have been made over the part of years are open source contributors. So we don't have a marketing team, we don't have a product team to lay out product features. We have been completely reliant on users, GitHub issues, and all of that. If you have something to complain, if you are not happy with it, please raise an issue. We'll be happy to solve that for you. And that's how we have been grown as a project. So Selenium has been I've contributing since 2009, and has been even there before. So from 2004 to now, we are almost going to be 20 years now. It's been a completely true open source project. It will not happen without your support. So I want to thank you so much for using Selenium. And if you have any issues, don't double think about it. Don't feel that, okay, will my request be addressed or not? We will address it. Join our Slack channel, and we'll be more than happy to help you. As it says, to me, open source is all about, innovation. It's an evolutionary idea towards innovation, and we hope that we all can achieve that. With that, thank you so much for listening in. I'm going to give it straight to Basrat. He's been answering it. Thanks, mate.
Speakers don't get anything. Just